the book of Esther and for the important lessons that it teaches us. And help us to grow in our appreciation for your great wisdom and for your great power by making something that looks pretty desperate turn out okay. And that gives us real hope, because it's easy in a world like we're living in today to get discouraged, but we want to be encouraged by you and by your word. And we realize that even in the life of your son Jesus, when he was upon this earth, obviously faced a lot of disappointments, a lot of rejection, a lot of jealousy, and even was put to death. But he conquered death, and you proved your power in that resurrection. And the church has gone through its ups and downs throughout history, but the church is still here. And I thank you for letting us know that the church will not be destroyed, and that when you send your son for the church, there will be a church for him to come to receive. And we want to be a part of that, and so we are encouraged to remain faithful even when it may not be easy, but we know it will always be right, and that our labor in your Lord, in your vineyard, will never be in vain. So feed our faith again today as we try to gain some new insights in the lesson of the book of Esther. I pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, one of the unique features of the book of Esther is all the banquets that were held. There are 8 banquets that are mentioned in this one book.
Wow.
We've already seen some of them. We saw the one that King Ahasuerus had for all of his people right at the very beginning of our study. And while he was having a banquet for the men, Vashti, as queen, was having a banquet for the women. And then, of course, after that, escapade, why? Because Vashti did not please the king, went for a year without a queen, but got another queen, and at her coronation then, we came to the 3rd banquet. And then at the time of Haman's appointment to be next to the king in importance, there was another banquet. It's kind of like they look for every opportunity they can to have a big banquet, a big celebration, which is fine. And then the day came that Esther is preparing a banquet for Haman and for the king. 2 banquets. We talked about the first one last week. So we're going to talk about the second one this afternoon. In chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, now the king and Haman came to drink wine with Esther the queen, and the king said to Esther on the 2nd day also, as they drank their wine at the banquet, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you, and what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be done." Now, does the king seem to be anxious to learn about what the queen is doing all this for?
Yes.
I think very definitely. I think her curiosity is really being, his curiosity is really being challenged by the fact that she's taking time to make known her wish. How many times has the king asked Esther to make known her request? Well, this is the 3rd time. We saw it in chapter 5, verses 3, and again in verse 8. And now we see it here in chapter 7 and verse 2. So 3 times he's asked her to make known her request, but she hasn't done it yet, but she's about to. Verse 3, then Queen Esther replied, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me as my petition, and my people as my request." Now, is the queen tactful in her reply to the king?
Yes.
I think very definitely so. She's very polite, very nice. She chooses her words very carefully, but shows the unselfishness of her request.
She'll give up her life for people.
Yeah, she's not only concerned for herself, but she's concerned also for her people. Now, is pleading for her own safety, in pleading for her own safety, does she put herself in danger? Yeah, I think she does, because the decree's already been signed. They cannot be changed, and it was not changed. All the Jews are going to face death. Now, they've got a few months to live before that day comes, but it's on the calendar, and it's going to happen. That day will arrive when that edict is to be carried out. Well, this could very well be the very first time that the king gets any hint to the fact that she is a Jewess. Her dark skin would not alone tell him that rather. But at least the way she phrases her words, she is one of those people which she says are destined to die. So she's concerned. Now verse 4, for we have been sold, I and my people, again, identifying herself with the Jewish people, to be destroyed. She's telling the king something he doesn't know here. To be killed and to be annihilated. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent. For the trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the king. Now, does the queen make clear a distinction between slavery and genocide?
Yep.
Very definitely. Does Esther control her emotions even though Haman is present to hear every word she speaks to the king?
Yes.
Yeah, she does. By the way, that what we just read in this verse, Esther making her petition to the king, in the Hebrew language is only 4 words. Now,
Wow.
more words when you translate it into English, but only 4 words. Literally speaking in English, what she says is, my life, my petition. My people, my request. But that's 4 words, the way the Hebrew language is. By the way, the Hebrew language is a very limited language. One of the reasons I think that the Lord intended that the Greek should be the language for the New Testament is because, boy, if there's ever a language that is really precise and detailed, it's the Greek language. Much more so than the English language. Not necessarily that they had a bigger vocabulary, but they had a lot more ways to express different thoughts than we do. They had grammar lessons that would make our grammar lessons today seem like kindergarten. Question number 3. Should the king have been alarmed at these words from Esther?
Yes.
Yes, and I think he was. He realizes that the life of his queen is threatened, and the people that she's representing are threatened. Now, what's significant about the phrase, we have been sold? What's she referring to here?
Down the river.
Yeah, the money that was given by Haman, actually Haman bought himself into being the prime minister of the land. He's second in command with the king, and he did it with 10,000 talents of silver, and that's going to put the king on easy street, and he's just going to be able to do whatever he wants to do, and has been exalted to that position, which he thinks is going to really be great. It's all going to backfire on him, but we'll find that out in a moment. Verse 5, then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he, and where is he? Who would presume to do thus? Now, does the king's reply indicate genuine concern and desire to take action?
Yes.
I think so. Is the king in any way responsible for this action against the Jews?
Yes.
Yes, he is, but he doesn't realize it.
Yeah.
He's going to realize it, but it's what he has done to Haman that has started the ball rolling that is going to end up destroying the Jewish nation unless something is done. Well, in verse 6, Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman became terrified before the king and queen. Now, does Esther hesitate to answer the king's question for the responsible person's identity?
No.
Not a bit. Folks, I think that takes great courage. But she had that courage. Well, what does she have to lose? And obviously her cousin Mordecai said, who knows what you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And she thought a lot about that, and her famous words were, if I die, I die. So she has a solid resolve. It's still going to be hard for her. Number 2, is Esther careful to expose the guilt of Haman while never appearing to bring any charge against the king?
Yes.
Yes, she is. She's not implicating the king in any way at all. And rightly so, because the king is not aware of all the details that Haman has in his own mind and that Mordecai himself is aware of. Number 3, what accusation does Esther bring against Haman?
He's an enemy.
Yes, he is. He's a wicked man. He is not our friend. Number 4, what 2 plots have been foiled by Jews in this story? Well, one plot has been foiled by the fact that Mordecai, who Haman wanted to kill, has been exalted and paraded through the streets and honored by the king, and that puts Haman in kind of a tight spot. And of course the other one is now the plot on the queen by Haman against the Jews. So, and this is going to be foiled too. Now number 7, verse 7, the king arose in his anger from drinking wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. Now, does Haman have good reason to be concerned at this time? He surely does. The king is very angry. He knows what that might mean. I think that Esther knows what that might mean. He was angry to Vashti. That was not good for Vashti. If he's angry for Esther, it would not be good for her either. There are 2 proverbs that you ought to write down as an answer to this question number 1. One is Proverbs 16:14. Proverbs 16:14 says, a king's wrath is a messenger of death, but a wise man will calm it or appease it. Another proverb is Proverbs 20 and verse 2. A king's wrath is like the roar of a lion. He who angers him forfeits his life. In other words, he's a man that can take you. You better be nice to him or he's going to do it. He's dangerous to be around when he's angry. Number 2, does Haman now realize the king has already decided his fate?
No.
Yes.
Oh, he does.
Yes, he does. He realizes that. When he sees how angry the king is. And of course, I have to believe that this is not the first time he ever saw the king angry, but not at him. But he knows what that anger will do. And he knows the power that he has. Number 3, why did the king go into the palace garden? Well, I'd like to know that myself. We're not told. But I ask that question because I think that we could probably come up with a pretty good guess. I think that he loves his queen. I think he's been startled. I think he's been angered. And I think that he may have gone out there hoping that he'd see some of his wise counselors and say, I got the shock of my life. What am I going to do about this? I can't believe this is happening to me. I can think of a lot of things that might have gone on in his mind at this moment and wondering what is going to be the proper response. Now, is the king's absence for a short time an advantage for Haman? It appears to be. Doesn't turn out to be. In fact, the very fact that he's gone for a moment is working into God's plan. Now, folks, I want us to really get this. God is using everything that's happening here to work out his plan. Now, God is not making this happen. God knows in advance it's going to happen. But it's going to happen because he foreknows the response that people are going to have. By the way, have you ever known anybody that reacted in such a way and you thought about it later and thought, that didn't surprise me at all? I mean, the better you know a person, the better you realize how they're going to respond to different kinds of situations. And I think that Haman must have been around the king enough to know, oh, he's not a happy camper right now, and I'm really concerned about this. Well, how is the banquet described in this verse? What did they do at the banquet?
Drink?
Yeah, it's probably a drinking party. That's really what it was. They just were drinking again and again. There seems to be an emphasis on that as we read this through. We're going to see it again here in the next verse. Verse 8, now when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, I find it very interesting. Why didn't he then come back in the palace where they're eating supper, or eating a dinner, or enjoying a feast? No, they're drinking wine. And I think that was the main thing. And I think that the queen knew that. And so I think that she was wanting to do everything she could to be on the good side of the king and to make sure he is amiable toward anything she might say. Well, when the king returned from the palace garden into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, Will he even assault the queen with me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Well, what seals the fate of Haman? What the king saw. I think that before the king came back in the room, I think Haman was thinking, oh man, I'm glad he's gone. I've got to talk to this queen. I've got to make sure that she saves my life and does not let the king make a hasty decision and do something that's wrong. Well, I think he's having a tough time doing that. And so I think he's pleading with her. Now, I don't have any inkling to think that that Haman's about to do something with the queen that the king thinks he may be doing. But I think the king may surmise, is my chief man trying to rob you from me? You know, it's interesting how minds think in light of what's transpiring. And so at any rate, this was the very wrong thing for Haman to see, for the king to see Haman doing, as far as Haman is concerned. Because he jumps to a very quick conclusion. And I think that he really thinks that he's going to abuse the queen and try to create a rift between himself and the queen, and he's not going to stand for that.
Why did they cover his head, his face?
This was a custom in Persia. Later on, it was a custom of the Greeks and the Romans. When a person was deemed no longer worthy to live, they immediately covered his head, because if he's not going to live, he shouldn't be allowed to see anything.
Oh.
So we're just going to cover him up to indicate this man is doomed to die. So this is a part of the custom in that particular day. That be done. Well, was the timing of what happened when the king walked into the room where Haman and Esther was significant?
Yes.
Absolutely. Excellent timing. Number 3, should Haman have left the room when the king did? Should have. Yeah.
Shoulda, woulda, coulda.
And the reason this is true is because proper protocol would say, when the husband and wife together, now that husband leaves, it's time for the other gentleman to leave too. You know, I'll always be grateful for the kind of teachers I had when I was still a teenager preparing for the ministry. And even in graduate school, I had a teacher that was a teacher of practical ministries. He served a large church in Columbus, Indiana, but he's teaching part-time at the school. And he made a real point of the fact that to us, all of us in his class were preachers. He said, don't you ever stick out your hand to shake hands with a woman, but shake hands with her if she extends her hand first. But don't you be the aggressor. And he said, when you go knocking on the door and the woman's the only one at home, don't you go in. You carry on your conversation at that door. You never know who may be seeing you there, watching you enter, knowing that she is there alone. Mm-hmm. You are vulnerable for anyone that doesn't like you and wants to stir some kind of a gossip about you. Just don't give Satan an opportunity. That was drilled into me. And I think of that often. And I see what I think is a lot of carelessness today. Because I see that the whole standard of morality is grossly relaxed in our society today. I mean, the way that some people dress and the way that some people behave and the kind of language that they use, all of this just shocks me. I keep my mouth shut. I think, well, at least I'll try to set a good example by my behavior. And but I am concerned. And I think this is a classic example about how wrong behavior can really get you into trouble, even when it may not seem wrong to you, and you may think that you're okay in doing what you're doing, but you shouldn't do it. So in this case, it was proper protocol that no man be there. And that's pretty good advice. Now, this next verse is really interesting to me, verse 9. Well, they all are, but this one gets my attention because I don't think of Harbona very often. Look at this man. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs. Now, what does that tell you about him? Other than the fact that he could not father a child, what would be his position?
Queens.
Yeah, he's the one that would take care of the queen.
Yeah.
That's right. He could be trusted. This is particularly important with royalty, you remember, because the royalty was always concerned about anyone who follows them to the throne of their own family must be the offspring of the king and the queen, not anybody else that's come in and pretended to be someone they're really not. Well, then Harbona, one of the eunuchs who were before the king, said, Behold indeed the gallows standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, hang him on it. Now, what does Harbona suggest to the king? Well, he said, King, I know something that you're now going to find out. Haman, since you saw him yesterday, has already erected a gallows 75 feet up in the air. It's on his own property. And he's got it there because he wants to hang Mordecai. And that's a man that you just honored. And when the king heard all this, all of a sudden things are coming together and said, well, if he's got that kind of an instrument, let's use it. Hang him, get rid of him. So he steps up and says the right thing at the right time. Did the king hesitate in accepting the counsel of this eunuch?
No.
Not at all, not at all. Well, there's another proverb that comes into play in this verse, Proverbs 26:27. Proverbs 26:27. Whoso digs a pit shall fall therein, and he that rolls a stone, it will return upon him. In other words, what you sow, you're going to reap.
Yeah.
If you dig that pit for somebody else, you're probably the one that's going to fall into it. That's Proverbs 26:27. Proverbs 26:27. All right, verse 10. So they hanged Haman on the gallows, which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. Now, what irony may be seen in this course of events? Isn't it interesting that the gallows that one man built for another was actually used for himself? That's kind of ironical. And Haman is executed for a crime that he actually didn't commit. King assumes that he is going to do something that he shouldn't have done. Well, obviously he was going to do something he shouldn't have done and going to destroy the Jewish people, but the implication of what he was doing as far as the king was concerned against the queen was something that's going to backfire on him for sure. Well, Josephus is a historian, and he writes a lot about the history of Bible days, and he responds to the record in the book of Esther in these words. Let me read what he wrote. I cannot forbear to admire God and to learn of his wisdom and justice, not only in punishing the wickedness of Haman, but in so disposing it that he should undergo the very same punishment which he had contrived for another person. So here is a historian that looks on this record of Esther, finds out, that really makes a lot of good sense. He was wrong to do what he wanted to do and planned to do. It backfires on him. It's only right that he should suffer that way. Number 3, did Haman get what he deserved?
Sort of.
Yes, he did. Is Esther's behavior and action laudable? I think so. I think she has been very discreet. Every step along the way, she's used proper protocol. She has taken her time. She's been poised. She's been determined. She's gone about it in a nice way. She's been very careful not to say anything to anger the king or to put the king down or to in any way accuse the king of what's happening, because this is all happening behind his back. Number 5, does the story of Esther help us to understand Isaiah 55 verses 8 and 9? It should not be 18. If that's 18 in your notes, it should cross that out, that 1. It's just verses 8 and 9. You'll be familiar with this. This is the passage that says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. As my thoughts are higher than your thoughts, and my ways are higher than your ways. This is a classic example of how the way of God may seem very odd to a lot of people, but obviously it prevails in the end. Well, God's plan always is made upon the basis of what he knows, not only what's going to happen, but what he intends should be the outcome of what does happen. So he's able to use what men themselves have decided to do in the timing that they've done it, in the place of doing it. He's going to make it all come together to accomplish his purpose. Now, at the end of each chapter, we've been asking the same question: what lessons do we learn from this chapter? I think there are several lessons to be learned here. One lesson is money is not the answer. I mean, Haman had the money, but that money means nothing if it means destroying a whole group of people. It's just not worth it. Another thing is, I think a lesson we learn is that the people who do wrong need to be identified. We don't do anybody any good by withholding information that really needs to be made known to the proper authorities so they can be dealt with properly. And how oftentimes people will say, well, I just don't want to get involved. And I hear that with increasing emphasis in our own day. There are a lot of things that, we ought not to be gossips, but there are some things that really need attention because they're dangerous. And innocent people are going to suffer. And if we can prevent somebody from being hurt, and we know about a plot that is designed to destroy them, we need to make that known. Yes.
Funny you should mention it. There was something on the news last night. There were 3 ladies that were having dinner in a restaurant, and they were sitting at a table that was close, and there was a man and a woman, and the woman got up to go to the restroom, and the man put something in her drink. And they saw it, and so one of the women got up and went in the restroom and told the woman, she said, that man that you're with put something in your drink. And she was really shocked because she said he was one of her best friends. And so the other one went over and somehow or other got the glass off the table, and they called the police, and they arrested him because he was going to do horrible things.
Yeah.
So that was people who stepped in and
Yeah.
handled it properly and saved something horrible from happening.
Well, what a blessing to have those kind of people sitting there at that
Yep.
time.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. And I think this is one of the lessons we take from this. Well, you'll think of other lessons, but let's move on to chapter 8. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had disclosed what he was to her. Now, was the house of Haman the king's to give? Yes, it was. At this time, king owns everything, And when a man is treated the way he has, when a criminal has been executed, whatever belonged to that criminal becomes then the property of the state. And here came the property of the king. How is Haman remembered in this verse?
Enemy of the Jews.
Yeah, that's significant, isn't it? Not as a prime minister, not as a wealthy man. He's remembered as an enemy of a group of people that he was determined to destroy. I think I told you this once before, but let me just remind you of it again. When the Jews celebrate this occasion, which is the Feast of Purim, we'll talk about that a little bit later, that's the way the book ends. One of the ways in which this is celebrated, they read the whole book. It doesn't take long to read it, it's a short book. When they come to this part of the book, well, we haven't actually gotten there yet, but when they come to where they actually name the names of Haman's sons, and when they talk about anytime the name of Haman is mentioned, everyone makes a lot of noise. And if they have children, they make sure the children are given rattles. They say, rattle that as loud as you can. And when they read the list of names, which we'll come to in a bit, the names of those who are going to be killed, who were part of his family, the person doing the reading has to take a deep breath because he has to read all the names before he stops reading, before he takes another breath. Interesting the way they celebrate some of these things, but okay. Verse 2, the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now, how is Mordecai honored?
The signet ring.
All right, he has the ring that Haman once had. That indicates now he is head man in the government. How quickly a change has taken place. One falls, another rises. And in both instances, it is a very rapid change from being base up to high and being high down to base. Number 2, does 1 Peter 5:6 describe what happens at this point? 1 Peter 5:6 says, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may lift you up in due time. I think that fits, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Mordecai is a man of God, and he's going to be exalted. But life has not been easy for him, but he's held his own, and he had the courage to stand up for what he believed was right. Verse 3, then Esther spoke again to the king, fell at his feet, wept, and implored him to avert the evil scheme of Haman the Agagite and his plot which he had devised against the Jews. Now, what unfinished business does Esther now take care of? Well, there are still a big group of people that are going to be wiped off the face of the earth. And she can't forget that. Because if that decree is carried out, that means her life is gone too. So she wants the edict that Haman has used the signet ring to seal to be overturned. That cannot be done. I mean, the whole system upon which the Persian government was built depends upon the fact that if it's the law of the Medes and Persians, it cannot, under any circumstances, be changed. You know, when I think about that, I think of people that want to change our Constitution today, and how people want to rewrite laws that we thought made such good common sense, and want to replace it with something very ridiculous. And I think, my, what is happening around us? Well, what suggestion does the king offer that will accomplish Esther's desire to save her own face? Well, he's going to suggest that, in verse 8, he's going to suggest that another decree go out, and that this decree that goes out would be sealed with the king's signet ring, which is now given to Mordecai, and hopefully whatever they come up with will provide some way of saving the Jews without undoing the previous law that all the Jews are going to be put to death. And as it works out, it does work. And so when you think, okay, how can Esther possibly stay alive? And how can the Jews possibly live when the decree is, you go out there and kill them? Now let me ask you a question. Who's going to have to do the killing?
King's army.
All the non-Jews. All the non-Jews.
In other words, your neighbor, if he was a non-Jew, he would come over and kill you?
Back in that day, that's right. Wow. Have you ever known a person that was told to do something and they refused to do it?
Oh, yeah.
What are you going to do with the Jews with the Gentiles, the Persian people, who refuse to carry out the law? Well, they immediately become lawbreakers, don't they? But in this case, they're not going to carry out the law. For what reason? They're afraid. And they don't want to get killed themselves. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself, but the whole scheme that's going to be put before the people that's going to be the outgrowth of Mordecai and Queen Esther thinking about this very seriously, will be an edict that is just as strong as the one that Haman had signed. Now, here Haman says, kill him. And now another decree comes out and says, Jews, I want you to know, this is what they're going to do to you. Now, I'm telling you this because they've actually set the date. You've got a few months left. Now, you can do one of two things. You can get out of here. Run for your life. Get so far away from them that they can't even touch you. That way they'll not kill you. Or, if you hang around, band together, get your armaments ready, and fight. And don't let them catch you off guard, because the time is specific. Be ready for it, and meet them, and take their life. Beat them to the punch. But don't loot them when you do that. Just destroy them. Well, do you think all the non-Jews heard about this? Sure they did. Now, what would you think if you lived next door to somebody that you were told to kill, and you found out they know exactly when you're going to do it, and how you're going to do it, and why you're going to do it, and they said, here's your gun, now you'd be ready to meet them. Don't you think you'd want to be the first one to draw your gun? I think so. This, in essence, is what is going to take place here. I think it's very interesting, because if you didn't know the rest of the story, and you're reading this, you think, hey, they're all going to die. And you can't change the law, so if the law says exterminate them, then that means it's going to happen. We live in a day when the law says a lot of things, but that doesn't necessarily mean what's going to happen. You know, so we have to be careful. All right, verse 9. So the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, that is, the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, the princes of the provinces, which extended from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to its script, to every people according to their language, as well as to the Jews according to their script and their language. In other words, this information is going out to everybody. Make sure everybody has an opportunity to read this. Now, are there similarities in the wording of this decree with the writing of the decree formed by Mordecai?
Yes.
Yes, they are identical in many places. Number 2, are the Jews given equal status in each province with others within the province? Yes, they are. Equal status. Number 3, does this verse appear to be a lengthy sentence? Yes, and it is. Verse 9 is the longest sentence in the Hebrew Old Testament.
Whoa.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Took 5 lines of type that I used to type this one verse. How long was it after Haman's edict was sent out before the present edict was sent out? 2 months and 2 days elapsed between the 2 edicts. So in that short period of time, this second edict is going out, and people are going to hear a different story. Number 5, is sufficient time left for the Jews to make arrangements to protect themselves? Well, yes, it is. You know, initially it was about a year off, not quite a full year, but almost a full year. And now, 2 months after this is going out, they still got a big portion of the year to get ready for this. And so the people have to realize, hey, what's going to happen on this particular occasion? What are we going to do as we anticipate that day coming? Verse 10, he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring and sent letters by the couriers on horses, riding on steeds sired by the royal stud. Does Mordecai take responsibility for drawing up the edict that the royal secretaries translate into all the languages of the realm, including Hebrew?
Yes.
Yes, he does. It's important to notice, put this in everybody's language. In other words, if a decree was sent out in our country, it'd say, make sure you put it in the Spanish language. Other languages people speak, but there are a lot of people that speak a number of different languages in our country. Number 2, would this be a major undertaking to get the edict out to all the people? Sure it would. We're talking about 60 nations here, about 60 nations. There were 127 Persian provinces this is going to, but copies of the edict to the Jews was in their own language, but in the language of the other people, it was in their language too. Now, number 3, how did the message get out to the people?
On horseback.
Pony Express, right, horseback. But they had a pretty good system. It worked for them as it did in the early part of our country here. Verse 11, in them the king granted the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble and to defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the entire army of any people or province which might attack them, including children and women, and to plunder their spoil. On one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, a copy of the edict is to be issued as law in each and every province, was published to all the people, so that the Jews would be ready for this day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So everybody knows about this. This is not a secret. So months to get ready. Are the Jews given the right to go on the offensive or on the defensive, or both?
Both.
Yes, primarily I think on the defensive. I don't think that the intent is that they should try to kill all the other people. But don't hesitate to kill them if you have to protect yourself. I think that's really the primary emphasis here. Their resistance could go as far to destroy and slay, but whatever it took to keep yourself from dying, then obviously you had the permission to do that. But they were not to attack unless they themselves were first attacked. Now, number 2, what was the purpose of the right to assemble?
To defend themselves.
Yeah, meet together so you can figure out a strategy, how you're going to work this out, where you're going to meet, what you're going to have to work with. Is the same wording of Haman's edict now used at the point in the edict prepared by Mordecai?
I can't do that.
Yeah, he's using the same thing that he copied out of Haman's edict, but now he's using it in Mordecai's, using it as part of his words too. Now, in verse 14, the couriers hastened and, impelled by the king's command, went out riding on the royal steeds, and the decree was given out at the citadel in Susa. Was any time lost in getting the word out to the people?
No.
Apparently not. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a large crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. For the Jews there was light and gladness and joy and honor. So these people in Susa, the main city here now, are really rejoicing in what has happened as a result of the courage of Mordecai and Haman. Number 1, is there a marked difference in the response of the Jews when the present situation is compared with the edict of Haman that was made earlier?
Yes.
Yeah, there surely is. The Jews responded to Haman's edict with mourning. They fasted, they wept, they wailed, but now they're responding with happiness and joy and gladness. What is the response of the Gentile population of Susa? Well, they're bewildered. They don't know what to make of this. And they see how the Jews are rejoicing, how they're celebrating. What does all this mean? Well, there's a proverb, chapter 11, verse 12, that says, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. So the wicked people realize their lives are on the line, and they're not so happy when they see how the Jews are being so happy. Now, it hasn't arrived yet, but they are anticipating what's going to happen, wondering what they're going to do at that time. Did the people realize the exaltation of Mordecai at this time?
Probably.
Yes, well, sure, because it was in Susa that he was on the parade.
Oh.
So now they realize this man, whatever they may have known about Haman, this is the man that's next to the king himself. And if he has issued this edict, and he has been honored by the king, and has a king's seal, signet ring sealed of the edict, what are they going to make of this? Well, let's read on. Verse 17. In each and every province and in each and every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree arrived, there was gladness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. Woo! They're getting a lot of converts here, folks.
Yeah.
By the way, that's not the way we're to bring people to the Lord. We don't beat them over the head to try to get them to be baptized. Was the response to this second edict favorable to Esther and Mordecai?
Yes.
Oh, yes, it was. What are you going to call these people who became Jews? There's a word for them. Proselytes, yeah.
Oh, proselytes.
Yeah. Have you ever been accused of proselytizing? You know, if you have a neighbor that attends a different church and you persuade them that your church is probably a better church to go to, and they listen to what you have to say and are talked into it, so they become, and people, the other church said, "What are you proselytes doing? You're proselyting our own members. You're stealing our sheep." That's what they say. Well, we're not stealing sheep if people are not being properly guided. We need to make sure they are properly guided wherever that place may be. So once again, we come to the end of a chapter and ask the question, what lessons may be learned from this chapter? Well, I think that one important lesson is civil power can be used for good. This is the signet ring of a king, a pagan king. And that's the very thing that's going to give power for these Jews to defend themselves and end up actually saving their own lives. Now, another lesson to be learned from this is the Jews would not have been delivered if Esther and Mordecai had not used some kind of real, interesting, creative thinking as to how we might send out another edict that would prevent the first edict from actually becoming what we thought it was all going to come to. Sometimes you just have to get some people with careful thinking and praying about it to come up with a sharp way to resolve a situation that otherwise looked like it was not going to work out. To me, one of the greatest lessons here is, in order for the Jewish people to be saved, what miracle did the Lord perform? Not one.
Oh.
Not one. There are a lot of times the Lord uses miracles, but the other times He doesn't use miracles at all. And the times in which He does not use miracles, He's usually working providentially. That's a beautiful word. That's a key word in Romans 8:28. God causes everything to work together for good to those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. Chapter 9. Now in the 10th month, that is the month Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, it was turned to the contrary, so that the Jews themselves gained the mastery over those who hated them. Now, did the second edict sent out by Mordecai prove to be effective? Yes, it did. Mordecai's counter decree is helping out the Jews to have hope. Even though the first decree has already gone out, the second one's going to make the first decree not seem insurmountable. Verse 2, the Jews assembled in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand before them, for the dread of them had fallen on all the peoples. Now were both Jews and non-Jews prepared to do battle?
Yes.
Yes, they were. What dread had fallen upon all the peoples? Now they realize that this decree is sent out by somebody who's replaced Haman. That means he's next to the king, the queen's next to the king is the king, and all this is on that side. So who wants to take on the king and his army?
No one.
So, they're overwhelmed when they consider the possible results of trying to engage in this kind of a battle, when they know that the king is not happy with what Haman has done in the first edict. Verse 3, even all the princes of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who were doing the king's business, assisted the Jews, because the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. Now, did the highest authorities help the Jews?
Yes.
Yes, they did. Because they knew they wanted to be in line with the king. Well, their lives were at stake. Their position was at stake. So we have all these people. These are the kind of people, by the way, that we've seen throughout the whole book. These are the kind of people that hundreds of them, thousands, met at the king's invitation to celebrate with a wine party, drinking party. In what way did the authorities assist the Jews? I think that they are going to maintain civil order. That's their job to do that. And they know that if anyone starts to take the life of a Jew and the Jew begins to defend himself, there's going to be trouble, and they're going to step in and say, wait a minute, can't have this, can't have this. These Jews have a right to kill you. You don't want to fight with them, better not. Verse 4, indeed, Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai became greater and greater. So what explains the growing popularity of Mordecai?
Save the Jews.
Yeah, just the circumstances that transpired. Now, reflect on some of this. Just as soon as Haman was killed, what did the king do to Haman's property?
Gave it to Mordecai.
Gave it to the queen.
Yeah.
And who'd the queen put in charge of taking care of that property?
Mordecai.
Mordecai. All of a sudden, here's a poor man. He's a very wealthy man now. I mean, he's got this probably huge estate there with all the kind of money he had. And now he's exalted next to the king himself. And all the rest of the people are seeing this. Do people get a bit squeezy when they realize that those who are close to the king are getting favors that other people don't? Yes, they do. You know, I'm leading a study in Daniel on Wednesday nights, which you've already had. But you remember that chapter in Daniel where Daniel prayed and it cost him being thrown in the den of lions? That which occasioned that was, there were three men that were top men in government. Daniel was one of the three. But was it pretty evident that Daniel was favored over the other two? So what did the other two do? Became jealous. And they tricked the king into signing something, didn't they? Now, somewhere along the line, some of these key people are beginning to wise up. They're going to realize you don't mess around with God. And the pagan monarchs are seeing this. The thing that really thrills me about both the book of Daniel and the book of Esther, written during the time of the Persian power as well as the Babylonian power, is that even in a pagan society, God has people who stand up for him, and the voice is heard. They may not be in the majority, but God has a way of taking care of his own people. And we've seen how that's all working out here in this particular book and saving a nation of people. Verse 5, thus the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. Now, does this verse suggest complete victory of the Jews over their enemy?
Yes.
Yes, it does. Because apparently when they were attacked, they fought back, and they didn't hesitate to kill or to destroy. If somebody showed their hatred toward them, what is the significance of the phrase, they did what they pleased to those who hated them? This indicates that they know that they're on the king's side, that the Jews have the protection of the edict that has the king's seal on it, that my responding to you, my defending my rights, and my taking your life to prevent you from taking my life is justified by the man that's in charge. And this builds up their spirit to realize they're on the winning team. Now we come to verses 6 through 10.
Oh boy.
I don't really want to read that because it's hard to read. Look at it, will you? These are names of people. At the citadel in Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And then in verses 7, 8, and 9, verse 10 tells us these are the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Jews' enemy. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Now, in addition to all the people that were killed, in other areas throughout the 127 provinces, here in Susa alone, they had these 500 that were killed. Now, did the Jews have to protect themselves in the capital city of Susa?
Yes.
Yes, they did. Who are those named in these verses?
Haman's sons.
Haman's sons. 10 sons. This is the part of the book, when they read it, the Jews, when celebrating the Feast of Purim, they read it all in one breath.
Whoa.
What did the Jews do not do they could have done?
Plundered.
Plundered. I think I misspoke myself earlier tonight, or this afternoon. I said they weren't allowed to plunder. Yes, they were on this occasion permitted to, but the fact is they didn't.
Yeah.
Which I think speaks well of them. They're concerned about their own freedom and their own lives, but they're not interested in taking something that doesn't really belong to them. How does this event compare with Saul's conquest of Agag and the Amalekites? Do you remember the story of Agag and the Amalekites?
King Agag?
What instructions were they given?
Kill him.
Yeah. Did they do it?
They saved some for sacrifice.
Yeah. They saved some of the animals, plundered it for sacrifice, and they saved the king for a
Trophy.
trophy, yeah. This is disobedience. The Jews did not take advantage of the liberty they had. Saul pretended to know better than what he thought God was saying. Got into trouble, lost his kingdom for that. Well, verse 11, on that day the number of those who were killed at the citadel in Susa was reported to the king. Was it customary in all wars for the number of the slain to be carefully made out and recorded? Yes, it was. That's true today, too. We have memorials, don't we, where names are recorded for us to remember them. I thought I was going to get through, but I'm not going to go over time any more than I already have. So we'll start here with this 12th verse when we resume our study next week. And because we'll get through that before the period is over, we will actually start in chapter 1 of 1 Corinthians. Our next study. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I thank you for this privilege to informally look at your word once again and to be reminded of your great power. The fact that regardless of what the events of history are, you're always in control. And even of the bad things that happen, you always make sure that good prevails. That really helps for us to know that, to realize that. May we apply it to our own lives, knowing that if we take a firm stand for the truth, as you promised, the truth will set us free. May we enjoy the freedom we have in Christ by living according to your will. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.